Okay, so let's make a start. First of all, thank you for attending today's webinar, looking at all doors closed in JD Edwards' world. So what we're going to look at is how and why you should implement all doors closed within JD Edwards' world. My name's Leith Marar. I've been with Q Software for 20 years or so. So I'm a pretty good contact for all matters to do with World. Let me just check my audio is okay and I'm recording okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly and it looks like the recording's working okay. Okay, so let's jump in. Okay, so really quick one slide on Q Software itself. Q's been providing GRC solutions for the suite of Oracle products for over 25 years now. And they have solutions for both JD Edwards Enterprise One, World, Oracle EBS, and now the ERP Cloud or Fusion or whatever Oracle are calling it at this stage of the game. Obviously, a big driver for why customers use Q is fraud prevention, but also to reduce the cost and complexity for managing security within all of your ERP systems, which is obviously a key aspect of running your ERP. And probably the biggest risk management thing that people come to us with as a lead is the issue around segregation of duties and compliance. And Q actually has qualified internal compliance and audit professionals, but as well we work with external companies. We have relationships with a lot of the major auditing firms, as you would imagine. Okay, so what's on the agenda for today? We're going to look at what we mean by the terms all doors open and all doors closed security, and the mechanisms associated with those, both from a high level, and then we'll get into some sort of the details around the opportunities and the challenges that you have depending on what release within World that you're in. We're going to look at the pros and cons for each of those strategies, excuse me, and we're going to have a quick look at multiple roles because there are a few holes in this process, well, in particular for people on old releases of World, and where multiple roles can both bridge the gap and actually move you forward in terms of your security implementation and specifically around all doors closed security. And we're going to kind of separate the challenge, if you like, or the tasks into dealing with both interactive applications and batch applications. Obviously, your interactive applications are the lion's share of your business, but obviously we've got batch applications to consider as well, and there's slightly different methodologies for each. And then we're going to actually get into some of the specific detailed challenges for all doors closed in World, particularly, as I said, around the older releases. We'll do some takeaways and recommendations to kind of summarize what we've covered, and we should have 10 minutes or so for questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, we had some questions come in before, and I've modified the presentation slightly to hopefully cover the questions that a couple of the people had on the way into the presentation. Okay, so all doors open and all doors closed, what do we mean by those? Well, all doors open essentially is you can also describe it as navigation control. Okay, and that means securing your system by stopping users going where you don't want them to, as the name would suggest. Okay. All doors closed, on the other hand, is also the term often used is application security. And in the context of World, that's really about securing the P-type program objects. Okay, and you know you've got thousands of those in JD Edwards' World. Okay, so user A does or does not have access to program B. Okay, so those are the terms because I think they get thrown around a lot and we assume people are familiar with them, but it's not always the case. And at a high level, what are the mechanisms that we're talking about, just to flesh this out a bit for all doors open and all doors closed? And when you talk about all doors open, probably the best way to think of it, the best way to visualize the challenge, if you like, is that you're presenting your application to your users in a tree-like structure, okay? And if you have something that mimics the G menu in JD Edwards' world, which is kind of the top level menu, you can imagine that as the base of your tree, the trunk of your tree, and then that goes up into smaller and smaller branches through, finance and accounts payable, and then you get into detailed processing over and above that. And your users may, assuming that the vast majority of your users aren't free to travel around using many traveler fastpath, your users will come into that tree structure at a given point. So they will enter somewhere along that branch structure, or they could come in at the bottom, at the base of that tree, depending on how you've set them up. Obviously, we will often have users with traveling rights, and in the context of world, that's many travel in fastpath. So that would be one of the things that we have to secure. And I'm sure in particular people on older leases of world will be familiar with the menu options and the user masking options that are out there. And these are pretty complicated things because the masks themselves are quite complicated. You've got the 5 masks, A, J, K, D, P, and F, and they apply to the user, the group they belong to, and the star public profile, as well as the menu and the options. So, and I know lots of you out there have struggled with applying masking options, but it's one of the tools that you can use for all doors open navigation control. Something that I'm often surprised that a lot of people don't know about are the hidden selections, and I'm actually just going to jump into our screen to show you these. Within World, your standard menu, if we look at a G menu, typically we're familiar with the 24 options that you have associated with your menu structure. Okay, but the thing you have to appreciate is if we go into the menu maintenance screen, there are 2 options. Let's look at the G menu. There's 2 options up here called the Advanced Technical and Setup menu. And they are where people go to when you select the option 27 and the option 29. Okay, so in this case, it's G01 and G09. If I just show you that from the G menu, so 27 takes us off to G01 and go back. And option 29 will take us off to the G09 menu. So in truth, you actually have 26 options to deal with. Although, typically you won't use them all, but it's something to be aware of. We have a lot of situations where clients will copy menus and not be aware of whether it's a JDE menu or one of their own menu stack, and they won't be aware that those hidden selections already exist. Okay. And once you get to your application, at the end of your menu option, you're not done. So a user can then navigate away from that screen to another screen and another screen. And again, to illustrate that, I'm just going to go to one of the Q software screens to illustrate the point. QSG11, option 17. So if I have a look at the address book, which is a highly connected menu, you can see here, this screen reads from left to right. So we're saying that an F18 function key will take us across to the P0016 program, and then F15 will take us over here. And you can see the consequences of this are from a navigation control and all those open control perspective are quite important, because there's literally hundreds of programs that you can get to from one application. I mean, address book is a highly connected object, but it's by no means exceptional. We've found over the years setting security up. Okay. So those are the all doors open mechanisms that we're generally talking about using and trying to control. From an all doors closed perspective, what's available to us? Well, we've got, I'm amazed actually how frequently customers don't know about the function key star all no lock, and I'll be going through that today. But we have what's called the function key star all no lock for people, particularly people on older releases of World. And if you're on A92 or above, That's when JDE, Oracle JDE brought in the action code inquiry security capability. From a batch perspective, you've got report for writer form security. Again, if you're on a late release of World, and I'll show you how that works. And if you're on an old release, you've got Dreamwriter user exclusive locking. It's not as clean, it's not as quite as effective, but you can go a long way to all those closed, even on old releases of World for your batch applications, and I'll show you how we do that. So a couple of points, really high-level points about the pros and cons of the two strategies, because it is important to say that there are pros and cons. It's not, it's not a simple thing just to say you should go all doors open, all doors closed. Well, we're saying you should go all doors closed, but we know that there is a degree of compromise that when you're trying to do this. So from an all doors open perspective, excuse me, I'm just on my tab. From an all doors open perspective, it's in a sense it's more intuitive, because you have to construct a menu structure that works for your user base, that allows them to navigate the system in a kind of coherent way that makes sense to them. So in that sense, you feel like you've already constructed that tree structure that's appropriate to your business, and why therefore can you not just use that for managing your security? And it also can work well for users with really limited access. So you might have people within the business who are just doing quite specific job functions. If they're working in a warehouse or doing something that's, that they're only using 2 or 3 screens, they only need 2 or 3 menu options. You're not actually dealing with that complex structures. So it can work in that situation. But the cons are, it's often inflexible. Well, it's usually inflexible, to be honest. Imagine you need to add an option to a menu or change a group profile association, whatever it is, without knowing the detail of the security settings for that changing. You're going to have a lot of confusion around what the security implications are of making those changes. Okay. And it's hard to give users access to disparate parts of the system. So again, go back to the tree analogy. Imagine someone's in one section of the tree, playing around in one branch structure. They don't need access to another part of the tree. Well, what do? Do you just create a menu link between the two? Well, how does that affect the rest of your user community? So you can see the challenge. And also these structures, these navigable structures, can be hard to interpret. As we saw with the function keys there, you've got a high degree of connectivity. So, you think I'll make one small exception, and the implications for that from a compliance perspective and compliance reporting perspective can be profound and make your job a lot harder. And therefore, associated with all that, you're going to end up with a high maintenance overhead going down the road. Okay. So from an all doors closed perspective, what are the pros and cons, and why are we advocating for all doors closed today? And the big one really is that you're not defining your menu structures and function key structures to meet your access requirement. We know you're probably doing that anyway, but that's to make the system usable and functional. It's not to make it secure. So if you do have a situation where you have to let somebody get to somewhere that you wouldn't normally want them to get to, if you have a decent all doors closed policy in place, you know that they're not going to be able to execute something that you don't want them to. Okay. It tends to be simpler from a setting up perspective, certainly on a program by program basis, because you're essentially saying I'm turning a switch on and off for a given user. Okay. And it's less prone to errors because you haven't got those complex structures that we've been talking about. Okay. And also, like we said at the top, when I was talking about queue in general, a lot of the drivers for people talking to us is around segregation of duties. So while you imagine you're trying to report your SOD policy, if you can point to simple security all those closed settings, you can say user A has got access to program A, but not program B. Okay, so it tends to be simpler from an SOD perspective because you're not trying to interpret, you're not trying to overlay a complex interpretation of system access and settings to a policy document that says a user should be able to do this and not be able to do that. From a cons perspective, and there are some cons for all doors closed, in Enterprise 1, Oracle, or JDE Edwards as it was at the time, they actually released it with an application security control that worked for all programs. Okay, you'll see today we can cover the vast majority, and in the late releases, effectively all of JDE using the all doors closed controls, but there is no application lock, simple application lock in the world. It's slightly different. And managing large lists of objects can be a challenge. I'll show you a couple of key software screens that can make this easier, but we do appreciate that can be a challenge, but hopefully we can give you strategies to simplify that. And also some of the functions, and ultimately what we're talking about with security and compliance is stopping people doing certain things, and it's not always as simple as this user can't use this program. Sometimes it might be associated with a business unit or a capacity to void or cancel a payment or an approval, or it might be something, search type security or posting a certain type of batch or creating a certain type of journal. So it's not always just as simple as object level security that we're talking about, but that's kind of true for all ERP systems. So you're going to have that challenge with all ERP systems. So that's actually kind of where roles come in to help you a little bit as well. Okay. And to that point, so I just wanted to go over one slide on roles and why I think they're important in this context. In terms of availability, if you're on a late release of World 893 or above, multiple roles JDE was implemented multiple roles, so you've got it on free of charge. There's on the G94 menu, you can see all of your role definition stuff, and you should start working with it and start. There's no cost implication for you, if you like, for studying using a roles-based implementation. And if you're not, and you do, as we would recommend, do a roles-based implementation, Q Software has roles support for all releases of JDE3. When I say all releases above A73 of JDE Edwards World. And critically, really, for roles, they abstract your security to templates that, as I've said, they can be applied to users. Your security administration shouldn't be a technical function. The process of allocating and deallocating access shouldn't require a security expert to do so. It should be saying that this user should be able to do this function. And within a role, I mean, all those closes is much simpler on that basis. But with a role, particularly when we get around some of those more complicated business processes, if a role is secured and a role is secured in all those closed fashion, and it can only do the things it's supposed to do, your security becomes a process of allocating and deallocating roles. Okay. And with multiple roles, they can be as granular or as macro as they like. Because roles, whether it's Q Software or whether it's Oracle, they're based around group profile definitions, and in the old structure you had user group star public, so roles tended to be very macro in the old rigid 3-tier architecture. With a multiple roles architecture, your roles can actually be really, really granular. You can say, I'll have a specific role that just does address book maintenance, or processes AP payments, or whatever it is. They can be really, really granular, so people can switch between roles very easily, or they can be more macro, particularly actually on the Oracle side, because Oracle's roles are an aggregate of different group profiles. So again, there's a lot of flexibility there. And some, the theme for today around all doors closed, some objects are hard to secure with all doors closed, as we'll see, and roles can be good, and I'll talk about how they'll help you out with that. And roles can also give you a more seamless transfer from all doors open to all doors closed, and again, I'll show you how you can do that with a roles-based implementation. Okay, so I'm going to get into kind of the more practical side of it, and I've just created a table here that has on the left-hand side all the different JDE releases from A73 up to A94, and when certain security controls were brought into those different releases. And we've broken the screen also up, the table up into interactive applications and batch applications. The vast majority of our applications are going to be interactive, but obviously we have to consider batch applications as well. And the different mechanisms that are available, you can see in that table so that are available to you, and we'll work from left to right. But just briefly, action code inquiries we see came in there at A92, and report rights form security came in at A93, and I'll show you how those work. But let's work from left to right. So I'm amazed, as I said, how many people don't know about the function key star all no lock. But let me just show you how that would work. So if I'm in an A73 environment here and I want to go into the address book, I can happily go in and do whatever I want to do against an address book record. Okay, any address book record, and because I'm in that screen, I can, obviously I can manipulate it from wherever it might be. Okay, so that I'm accessing it here from the G01 menu, but that address book revisions application could be anywhere. So the ideal solution, and all those close solution in world, is the function key star or no lock. So if I go to the G94 menu and go down to the function key control application and go VO1051, the address book, I've got nothing set up at the moment. Let's go add my user. And I specify star all. Star all is the function keys I want to lock, and I'm locking all of the screens, and I'm saying no for no access. Okay. So what that means is then if I go off to that menu, that option, wherever I try now to run the address book, not just from the G01 menu, I'm locked out. So, if I've got traveling rights, if I can go wherever I want to go, whenever I hit the address book, I'm not going to get in there. Okay. Similarly, for if we go back to the table, you'll see action code inquiry came in at A92. Excuse me, I'm jumping around the screens, trying to click on the screen that I shouldn't. Similarly, for interactive applications, if you are on A92 or above, if I go into our A92 environment, I just wanted to have a quick show of the action code inquiry capability. Again, I'm going to go off to the G01, and I can run address book revisions. Let's see if I've actually got a record in here. I do. Okay, so go to action code authority. And where are we? Option 4. Pick program ID, P151, and let's do an add. And I'm just going to add all no's for a second, and I'll tell you why momentarily. All no's. So I'm saying for my profile, I'm not allowed any action code authority to the screen. And when I go off to try and get into the address book revision application, I get a very similar sign-off message. It's a slightly different message, but it's the same thing. And again, the screen is locked wherever you try and access it. Okay, so the couple of things to note on the action code inquiry, a couple of gotchas. So if I go back into the program, I'm just going to grant myself access back. Why? If I was to try to set a no authority for my user, so it's the action code inquiry here that's the secret source that's doing all the work for us. If I try to set that to no in isolation, JDE is going to throw me an error message. Okay, so if you're doing this and you're finding you're getting unexpected errors, it's because it won't allow you to apply action code authority and still have add, change, and delete and export to be allowed. So if you're going to turn inquiry off, you have to have those off. And similarly, if you've got inquiry off, you have to have the add authority off. So it's often simpler. You'll see, I mean, there are different combinations that you can use, as you can see on the screen, but it's going to be much simpler for you if you do set them all to no. Okay, I'm just going to take that out for future use. Next time we come to demo this, I don't trip over myself. So, and the critical thing to remember about these controls, there's the function key star all no lock or the action code inquiry, is it works for every screen in every location. Okay, it even works for the JDE kernel screen. So the P00 menu screen is just another screen in JDE, P00 menu. Okay, if I do an inquiry on that, you can actually lock people out of the JDE Opens kernel if you like with this application. Okay, so every screen in JDE is controlled, including the menu, is controlled by the action code inquiry capability. So getting onto batch applications, things do get a bit more complicated. Particularly, it's probably the most challenging areas for people on old releases of World. Now, the best way to do this is a combination of the user-exclusive lock on the Dreamwriter, as you can see in this column here, and function key security, and I'll show you how that works. So if I go back into an A73 environment, and I'm going to go to an AP menu with a couple of batch applications on here, a couple of batch reports. Now, I'm showing you two different ports because they submit in two different ways, and it's relevant to how you lock these out. So if I take an option 3, we have what's called a blind execution. That job, I've just taken option 3. I'll happily go away. It runs the application and it generates a report for me. Okay. Sometimes you'll see for your batch applications, for your reports, you'll get prompted with a versions list, with the Dreamwriter versions list. Okay, and that's a slightly different criteria, because if you imagine you've got a user can then select any version of the application that they want to run. When you're doing a blind execution, a specific version of an application is associated with that form. Okay, the JDE 0001 in this case. So remember, there's two different kinds of batch submission. I mean, you can have versions list, and they're most commonly for interactive applications, but the vast majority of batch applications will be either blind execution associated with Dreamwriter, or you'll get prompt for versions list. So what do we do in this instance? Well, we've got something called the user exclusive lock. So if I go into the P04702, which was the blind execution version of the application, okay, and I see up here, if I go into the Dreamwriter, look at some of the parameters. Under here, we have what's called the user exclusive lock. And the setting you want to apply is security level 3. Okay, at the moment it is set to 3 and only I'm allowed to execute it. I'll just show you. And the reason is that the other releases on the old versions of World do apply some security, but you're still generally allowed to copy the version of the form. Okay, and obviously if people can replicate it, then they can create their own version that they can submit. So it's really when you're using user exclusive lock, you wanted to set it to level 3. So what that means is for a user, I go to another user who's obviously does not have access. Let's go demo user, excuse me, demo 73 01, and I go to the G0421 menu, do a submission. It basically just does nothing. Okay, there's no submission, no execution. These are all reports. I'll just clean those out for proof. Okay. Okay. Go in. I'm going to delete my spool files. So when I do that submission, just basically nothing happens at all. Okay. Now, the challenge then is what happens with these ones where people are prompted for versions. And this is where function key security can come in to help you. Okay, so if you saw it in my table, it's a combination of both Dreamwriter user exclusive lock and function key security. So in here, you can see basically what I've done is if I go back to my security, the user actually applying the security with, I go to the G94 menu. Remember when we said that the function key security lock works for every single screen in JDE, and that includes the versions list, the parameterized versions list that you get for Dreamwriter submission. So if I go to my function key security, inquire on that screen, which is the V98300 screen, I can see here my dem user a star all no associated with that screen, okay? And they're locked out. And if I was to switch that to a Y, just to show you, it is the control that's doing the job, doing the work for us. Okay, go back into the option Option 9, that user can then get in. Okay, so the two controls you have are DreamWriter user exclusive lock and the locking the versions list. So the things you want to really think about is that as a general guide, when you're setting up your menus and you're setting up your batch reports, first of all, think about how many users typically, if you're an enterprise of 100, 200 users, probably not more than 5% of your user base is actually going to have to submit these kind of batch reports. Everyone else is going to be going to function keys. If they're generating anything, they're going to hit a function key from the screen. People are going in and running specific reports, typically around accounting, are going to be a small proportion of users. Nobody else should have access to the versions list. Okay. So that's why you want that V98300 lock. And then within that small user, 5 to 10% user base, you can use the user exclusive lock so that only users who are known as either, the terminology changed a little bit within JDE. It's whether it's the person who created it, the person who last used the version, or the owner as it became in later releases of JDE. You should know which versions are associated with which forms and who within that small community of users should have those access to those things, and you want them essentially to be doing blind executions, as we saw with option 3. Okay. And the blind executions, let's just talk about that for a minute, because it is a little bit complicated. If you look at the G0421 menu, look at the submissions, there's an option code down here which controls whether the submission is a blind execution. Option 3 is blind and F18 locked. Okay, I'll come on to the F18 key in a minute. But it also depends a little bit on whether it's defined as a batch application. So I won't get into the weeds on this. If anyone wants me to go into talking about this, I can offline. But essentially, remember, lock the screen, the version submission screen. Know which versions of forms that you've got for the rest of your community, and use the user exclusive lock for those. Okay, so for those of you who are lucky enough to be on the later releases of World, you have the great control of the report writer form security, and this obviously works for DreamWriters. So if I go into our 9.3 environment, for those who are not familiar with 9.3, the security menu changed a bit. When you go to the G94, you've got 2 more high-level menus now. You've got a security officer menu and a roles-based security menu. But if I go into the security officer menu, you see all the lovely security controls we're all familiar with, action code, function key, and down here, option 19 is the report writer form security. So if I go into there, I currently have access, I believe, to the forms I'm wanting to demonstrate to you. Click my profile. Okay, those are 2 batch versions of the form. If I go to another session, just to show you working, how it works, what it looks like, if you've not set it up before. And I go to the G0421. Again, I can take an option 3 for a submission, submit my batch report. Again, option 11, and I could execute any version of that form that I want to. Okay, unless I have user exclusive lock security assigned to it. But you don't need to worry about that with A93. If I go action code change, let me jump out of that screen, actually, because I don't know if JD would like that. Do an action code change. Again, I'm going to set all these parameters for execute, change and delete to no's for simplicity. Okay, acquire D. D stands for the form type, so you can apply it to other form types as well. And then when I go back to those applications, if I take an option 3 now, you can see I'm not authorized to that form. And with the version of the submission, I'm locked out of every version of that form. Okay, so there's really, if you are on late releases of World, there's really no excuse for not doing all doors closed, regardless of how you've configured your menus. Okay. Okay, so a couple of the specific gotchas. I just wanted to, because it's sometimes these things are, they sound easy when people are jumping through screens and stuff, and when it actually comes down to practicalities, it's a little bit more complicated. Let me show you talk around some of the gotchas. Okay, so as we said, one of the cons associated with all doors closed is applying locks to large lists of objects. Okay, and I'm going to show you the QSoftware way because it speaks to how you can do this, whether you're using a tool like QSoftware or you're using generic SQL controls. Okay, so let's say you wanted to do, an action code inquiry, or in the case of the function key star all no lock, a bulk update to a whole bunch of users. Well, if we look, and again, these are QSoftware screens, but I'm just using JDE Edwards controls. We're not adding any level of security above what native JDE Edwards can do. So if I look in here, within JDE, we've got over 1,800 screens in JDE. If you are a QSoftware, and I know there's a lot of QSoftware customers on the call, I can take an option, an F14 option, and I can apply that global star all no lock to every one of these screens, okay, to every single screen in JDE, in fact, okay, or every one of those 1,800 screens. I just type in a user profile here, or a role, a group profile and a role, okay, and it will apply that star all no lock to everybody. So if you do the same thing with SQL, write it to the 9612 table, you'll get the same effect, okay, and similarly for action code. So we can do the same thing for add, change, and delete, and to lock down all of those program objects. Okay. So that's, you can use SQL for your bulk updates or use QSoftware if you are a QSoftware customer. Managing specific versions of Dreamwriter's forms. Okay, so we're saying use blind execution or lock the V98300, and I should have added actually in there also there is another key that you need to be aware of, which is the F18 function key. Although some of these applications will do a blind execution, if your user community are well informed enough, if I go to that blind execution option 3, if I take an F18 function key, you'll see I can actually see the versions that's associated with that. But that's no problem because the user shouldn't, by default, you should have the star public star all no applied to the F18 key associated with P00 menu. But if you haven't got that, that's a baseline lock that you should have. A bit like action code star all no. At least your F18 star all no should be set to locked out. Okay, so it'll just stop people. Even if they're doing a blind execution, they may be able to prompt, and it will stop them doing that prompting. Okay. Also, yeah, another thing to note with the star all no lock, and again, this is getting a little detail, but I think it's useful. If I go to the G94, the way that the logic behind the JDE Edwards implementation is that it won't let you in the screen because it knows you can't do anything when you're in there. Okay, but if I have, I'm locked out of the screen just to show you again for proof. So I'm locked out of the address book where I want to execute. But if I go back into the function key security settings and I go, I've got this, leave that function keys lock, star all no lock there in place. Yeah, 105. But if I was to add what's known as the standard key set, and that's things like the F3, F9, F12, F24 keys, STD stands for standard, and I go action code change. Okay, excuse me, it should say yes, because it knows that's a conflict. Okay. So I've got, just to recap, I've gone for the VO1051, the address book screen. I've said star all no, star standard yes. Okay, so the star all no is there. Okay, but when I go to the address book, because the standard is yes, I can still get in. So you can't, when you're doing your authorization, look for any of the keys, typically the star standard keys that are going to overwrite the star or no lock against the video. Okay. Okay. And the thing to note about action code, it's a little bit deceptive in JDE Edwards, and if you are on a later release, and applies to A9.2 and above, so you don't actually even have to be on A9.3. But if I look at the action code authority setup screen, all the action codes are presented to you in the same place. Okay, look at my user. I don't have anything set up. Let's go for pick a program ID, P1051 probably. Okay, got some action code security there. Excuse me, I'm in a 7.3 environment. Let me go to my 9.2 environment. And I go to the action code. You can see here, P1051. You can see here your action code is lumped in with your add, change, delete, okay? And they're not quite the same. Action code inquiry works on, as we've said, works on every single screen. Action code add, change, delete only works on screen that have got this action code control in the top, and not all of them do. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of. If you have the Q product, you're probably aware of it because we have a filter that shows you which programs are and are non-action code securable for a change delete. So just to know, although they're presented to you the same way on the same screen, they actually work in slightly different ways. So it's just something to be aware of. And yeah, so dealing with where non-securable objects with roles. So I just want to show you quickly some stuff around roles. Take 2 minutes on that. So again, if I'm going to sign in as a 7.3 user, the nice thing about roles, and this is actually true of whether you're using a Q software role implementation or a JDE Edwards role implementation, is that if I go into a normal JDE Edwards environment, it's just JDE looks the same. All that you get when you go into a roles-based environment is you're presented the different roles that you've been allocated, okay? And the key thing here really is, going back to the tree analogy, if I go into my address book inquiry users, I'm at the G04 menu. So I'm in a very small restricted part of the tree. I can only get to, whatever this menu allows me to do, and whatever other menu options I've got. I can go off to the G021 menu and wherever I can go, because I have no traveling rights, okay? But, when we were talking about the inflexibility of all doors open, the beauty of roles is I can't navigate to the G03 or the G04, but I can select a role and be taken off to those different parts of the system. So I can effectively jump from one branch to another without allocating menu travel to my user, and that's really the critical point, and without creating a hard-coded menu link between the two. So it's the roles that are allowing me to jump around the tree structure. This is what we were saying about your roles can be as macro or as micro as you like, okay? So that's an AP role, an AR role takes me off. And again, I've got no traveling rights. And because you can associate your traveling capability with your role, if I go play the security officer role now, obviously I'm back to being able to do anything and to be able to travel. So when you get into those corners, those edge cases where, particularly if you're on old versions of World and you're looking at, say, batch applications or certain types of, maybe they're bespoke applications that you're running from a JDE Edwards menu, you don't need to link them to JDE just because your users don't have traveling rights. You can create a specific menu, and you can associate a specific role or set of roles with that specific menu, and you can just give that to the users who need that, and then nobody else can get in there and use those functions. Okay. And moving from all doors open to all doors closed with roles. So this is kind of, again, linked to what we were talking about, doing these bulk updates to applications and not having to go big bang when we were talking about roles. So when we were in that screen, and again, we were saying, I was showing you how to apply security, and this, that applies for action code inquiry or the function key star or no lock, where we were doing these bulk updates. Imagine this security that you're setting was associated with a specific role. Okay, so if I go in here and I want to lock every single screen using the F14 or doing SQL to do the update, if I type in there, there's nothing to stop me typing a role profile up here. Okay, and then doing, let's say you want that role to have access to 4 or 5 functions. There's nothing to stop me doing a global lock like this, or doing a star public star or no lock on action code inquiry, whatever it might be. So rather than having to worry about the top level, if you think of your 3-tier hierarchy of user group public or user role public, and you know you can't turn public off because you know that it's going to impact too many of your users, there's nothing to stop you creating roles that are secure by doing bulk update security, that are roles that are globally secure. And then when you're happy that your user population has suitably migrated to a roles-based architecture, okay, because they're all within their secure roles, and it doesn't have to be roles. You know, if you're using comprehensively using groups, there's nothing, you know, group profiles or roles, you can think of them just as security buckets, if you like. There's nothing to stop you creating all those closed, globally locked down groups or roles, and then allocating your users to those roles before you turn star public off. Okay, so it just de-risks the process for you when you finally come to turn those, because the ultimate end goal is to get to the state where you're star public, star all, no, no, no for all of your critical security settings. Okay. So some takeaways and recommendations before we leave for some questions. Menu security is really an 80-20 solution, and it's, you know, it's very tempting to use it because it covers so much of your navigable controls. But as we've seen, your function keys can take you all sorts of places you don't want your users going, and it's really that 20% that tends to be the critical piece. Okay, JDE Edwards is configured to be highly connected to itself. So as soon as you let people get into spaces they're not getting into, unless you've got that good all doors closed backstop, it's that 20% is always going to be what bites you. As we said, function keys allow you know, we did a test once. We created a single menu, single option of the address book, and as we said, the user could get to over 500 applications within JDE Edwards. So it's not just your menu structure that you have to think about. So when you're doing this, create a plan and go step by step. You don't have to, you know, whether you're doing it by roles or whether you're doing it with you know, standard, you know, globally secured group profiles, as we saw. You can create those things offline. You can start to define your business processes, create those secure buckets that you can then start allocating users to. And as a starting point for your community, don't forget you've also got the menu history tracking application. So you've got, you know, this table. Make sure your menu tracking is on. So you have in here, if you've got your menu history on, use me control. Run query. F82. So your F082H will have all of the menu records that your users have taken to wherever they've gone around the system. I think probably my latest selections and options are down here at the bottom. Okay, so where you can use that as a starting point to know what your users need. You know what menus they're going to and what options that they might require. Okay, so that'd be your friend. And as we said, consider implementing multiple roles, whether they're JDE or Q. If you are fortunate enough to be on a late release, have a look on the G94, 9401, 9402 menu, and you can see all the settings in there. And finally, if you have an intent, if you want to upgrade if you are running an old release, and we know there's still a lot of people out there running old releases of World, and you're having an internal battle to make a case for upgrading. Hopefully you've seen from today that there's good rationale, good reason to actually upgrade, because you do have much better all doors control, and you're going to end up saving your business a lot of money by not messing around with some of the complexities that are associated with the old versions of JDE World. You know, JDE, they left a lot out for security in world, and they were a bit slow to the party because they, if we're truthful, weren't expecting people to be running world for so long, but in the later releases they did a much better job. And it wasn't just all those close controls, even around things like advanced menu security and some of the other, they use the security workbench that they've got. There's some great security controls and they're going through. Okay, so here are some contact details. I'm going to leave this session open. I haven't tried to take any questions. I'm going to check now. I'm going to hang around for the last 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to look in chat and see if there's any questions come up. I've got something here. Okay, that's a generic, but I'll hang around for the next 10 minutes or so. If anyone does have any questions, please just throw them at me. If not, you can see my email address is up there, but you can see the generic Q software. As I said, there's a lot of our customers on this call, probably know me personally anyway. If you want any kind of follow-up, just let me know. Happy to have, to go into a bit more detail around some of the things we've talked about today. But hopefully I've answered the questions that came up before. But as I said, I'll be hanging around for another 5-10 minutes or so. But if you do need to jump off and do other things, by all means, please do so. And hopefully we'll catch up with you guys again soon. Okay, guys, we do have a couple of questions. Apologies for being a bit slow on getting back to you on the questions. I'm just going to blow that out so I can see. Okay, so will you explain how to implement roles in A7.3? That's you do need to be a Q software customer for that. So that's really the only way you're going to do that. But the question is actually coming from one of our customers, so perhaps I can take that offline and talk to them about that. But yeah, you will need to be a Q software if you are on an old release. Well, the alternative is to upgrade. And the other question is the best approach to start from scratch? Assume existing security will be removed. I think the answer to that is to take the business piece by piece. Your users are where they are today, and you don't need to just throw everything out of the window. Pick a business unit and start with that business unit. And I don't mean the literal sense of the BU security, the cost center. I mean, whether it's an accounts department or a finance or personnel or whatever it might be, pick a small division of the business and have a go at implementing roles and security within that. Because as we said, you can create these buckets offline and you can start to use them and get comfortable with the strategy. And then as you get comfortable, what we've generally found is that a lot of our customers, once they've started to do things like create secure roles or secure groups, they're then more comfortable with actually modifying the groups that they've already got rather than creating completely new groups. They're happier creating completely new groups or roles in the first instance. But then once they see the process and they're comfortable that it works and they can jump people in and out of groups and roles, that they're comfortable with doing that. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. Okay, guys, I think we're coming up to the hour. Unless there's any more questions, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. As I said, a few of you people on the call, if you need me, my email address is on the top there. Just ping me an email. But if you're one of our customers, obviously just email me direct if you want to take anything offline to have a chat about what we've done. As we said, we recorded the session today. One more quick question. What are the limitations of updating JDE release level? What are the limitations of? Okay, the question is, what are the limitations of updating? Okay. Well, that's a fairly open question. I mean, what are the limitations of updating when you're on A7.3? It's really the complexities you have around if you're on A7.3 are you don't have the action code inquiry, so you have to use the function key star or no lock, but that does work for every single screen in JDE. but just be careful that you don't have, as we said, you don't have the overlying security that, like the star standard, that then allocates function keys back to users within the screen. So you can't simply query the 9612 table, which has your function key security, and you can't simply query that table and look at the function keys all no locks. You have to check for all the function key security for each screen effectively, or just to make sure that if you have the function key star all no lock, it is the only record associated with a given screen for a given group or user or whatever it might be. So that's one complexity. And the other is that you don't have, when you're doing your Dreamwriter user exclusive lock, you've got to use that combination of the user exclusive lock and lock out both the prompt for versions list, which was the V98300 screen, and lock out the F18 prompt. So even if it's a blind execution, they may be able to take an F18 to get into the versions list for a given version on a form on a menu. Okay, so thank you for that question. Hopefully that answered it, but if not, drop me an email and I can have a chat. Okay, guys, I think we're running up to the hour. I hope you found today somewhat useful. You can see our website, and obviously there'll be somebody there to answer any questions you have. But obviously, if it's around world, it'll probably come back to me. But hopefully, we'll be speaking again at some point in the not too distant future. Thanks for your time today, guys. We'll be putting this recording up to share with anybody who might need it. Okay, thanks for your time, guys.